Welcome, audience, to our final discussion. COP28 has wrapped up. We have an agreement, and this is an opportunity for us to talk to a leading U.S. policymaker who was on the ground about what he saw in Dubai. We're joined today by John Curtis, representative from Utah, a Republican member of the House of Representatives, and the leader of the conservative Climate Caucus. Mr. Curtis, welcome to CSIS Digitally. I'm so glad that you're here.
Oh, it's a delight to be with you, and this is a great topic. Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Curtis, let's get right to it. This was your third conference of the parties. How did you see this one? How were you received as a Republican coming from the United States, as a U.S. policymaker more generally? And what are the differences you've seen over the past few years?
You know, I'd love to start with the last part of your question and then move forward. So I went to COP in Scotland 3 years ago, my first time to COP. And there had been a few Republicans before me, but not many. And we went, the Conservative Climate Foundation took, I think there were approximately 4 Republicans that we took over. And if I'm honest, we spent our time, what I would say, on the periphery of everything, walking around, not understanding what COP was, not understanding how to be involved. And I think people viewed us with a great deal of suspicion. Okay, Republicans are here. Do they want to debate the science, right? Why would Republicans come to COP? And we surprised people because we weren't there to debate the science. We were there to kind of stake out some turf as conservatives and say, hey, we care deeply about this, but our ideas are slightly different. And we have some that are exactly the same, but we also have some that are different. The environment 3 years ago was that nuclear was bad. And that was one of our points is, hey, like we need to be talking about nuclear. We don't see a path there without nuclear. And then I had a chance to go back last year to Egypt, and our group was slightly larger of Republicans, but we were a little bit more accustomed to what to expect. And so I found myself, for instance, on the U.S. Pavilion on a panel with an international press corps and an opportunity to explain things and our perspective on climate. And I came away thinking, wow, that was amazing. I had a chance with international press to make my points, feeling very, very good about it, and our reception there, quite frankly. And now fast forward to this week, where a Republican-led delegation by Energy and Commerce, with the vice chair of Energy and Commerce, a Republican, led a delegation of Republicans and Democrats to COP. That is a massive move in 3 years. And I don't think it should be lost on people that Republicans led a bipartisan delegation over to COP. And one of my highlights of the trip was a good friend, Scott Peters, a Democrat from San Diego, was on a panel with me. And he said, wow, I'm the token Democrat on this panel. And I had this moment where we're at COP and a Democrat is the token member, right, on a panel. That's a big deal for Republicans. There were 3 of us and Scott. And so I just think that it's really groundbreaking and important that Republicans are starting to move into a position of not just on the periphery, right, thinking, we have different ideas, but actually on the stage, being thought leaders, not debating the science, debating the methods, right. Which is a good debate. And so I would just tell you, and that was probably a longer answer than you wanted, but I'm not sure if people really appreciate, because if we're going to make progress, it's got to be bipartisan, right? I mean, you'll have some victories, but they're not as long lasting and not as meaningful. And then they're attacked if they're not bipartisan. But if we can do bipartisan work on this, everybody should be cheering the fact, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, that Republicans were over there in force and that we brought our Democratic colleagues with us. And for the short time that we were there, we were having conversations at the drinking fountain, in buses, on airplanes, right, about how to move this ball forward.
You know, it's very interesting to me, actually, because the way you talk about our domestic situation, right, we need this bipartisan consensus. The more we work on consensus, the more stable our approach is. There's a way in which that's true globally, too. Right? So the UNFCCC has to end in consensus. And this was an interesting one because it's Dubai, right? This is a petrostate. The COP president is the CEO of a national oil company. How do you think the venue and the host affected the conversation, and what did you see working or not working or causing tension?
So first of all, I think it was huge, and in a positive way. I represent coal and oil and gas in my district. If we're not having conversation about bringing these people with us, it's a huge mistake. And I've learned in my district that they want to be part of the solution. And when I go to the coal and oil and gas in my district, and I say hypothetically, you know what, this isn't going to work. You guys have to go away. We're going to shut you down, right? Well, what do you think their response is going to be, right? They're going to fight, and they're going to push back. This is their way of life. This is how they and their parents and their grandparents and those before them eked out a living. And by the way, these are the same people who for generations sacrificed their safety and their health so that all of us could go over to a light switch and flip that switch on and have the lights come on. And so when we go to these people and say, thank you, first of all, for that. And by the way, the world is making serious changes, and you can be part of those changes, right? You can be part of the solution. We need your best minds. We need your best efforts, and we're going to take you with us. You can see how it's a very, very different dialogue. So for this to be over in UAE and to have a nation whose prosperity came from fossil fuels and who has worked very hard to transition themselves, but realizes that the world is still using 80% right fuels, right? It just is. And that they're on a mission to provide cleaner and cleaner and cleaner fossil fuels, as are the people in my district. Why don't we let them into the conversation? You know, listen, when I go to my district and say, look, we got to figure out how to get you net neutral by 2050, they're okay with that challenge, right? They don't mind that challenge. They're pleased that they are challenged and that somebody's saying, here's what you have to do to be relevant. And so I think this being over in COP allowed people like myself to advance this idea forward, that it's all about emissions, not the source. And in COP last year, one of the things I said is, look, you have to make a decision. Do you hate fossil fuels or do you hate emissions, right? Well, we should hate emissions, right? And so to the extent that fossil fuels are lowering their emissions, we need to be applauding and cheering. To the extent that they're making commitments to be net neutral by 2050, we need to be applauding and cheering. Or we have to decide, no, we just hate fossil fuels. We want them to go away. We don't care, right? It's not about emissions. It's about fossil fuels. So I do think that was an important part of being in the UAE. And we had a chance with my group to meet with the president of COP and have him articulate. And he was very forceful and very convincing and following the science, right? Like, so, and this is one of the things Republicans love is like, okay, we'll follow the science, but everybody has to follow the science, right? Like the math matters, right? So I'm sorry that here again, I'm giving you longer answers than you probably want, but I think it was really important.
Not at all. I mean, that debate we saw play out very fervently over the last few days, right? What were the parties going to be able to agree to? And they came to a resolution that says the world needs to transition away from fossil fuel-based energy systems as part of achieving net zero. So it sort of struck a middle ground between we need to move away, we need to phase out fossil fuels immediately. It kind of skirts around this prefix of unabated. Do you feel that meets the notes that you think the global approach to climate change should have?
I'd love to, let's compare nuclear for a minute. 3 years ago, that same body said nuclear was bad. And today they've embraced nuclear.
Tripling of global capacity was the big announcement, right?
And look, this is one of those examples, like, let's do the math.
Yep.
You can't get there without nuclear, right? And so I think this is kind of where I'd say, you know what, I'm okay. I think we made progress on this discussion. I don't think we resolved it. And I'm going to bet, I don't think we turn as fast as we turn on nuclear, but I'm going to bet as we go down the road, there's going to be much more realistic conversations about, it's about emissions, not the source.
Right.
And great. If we need nuclear, right, we're talking zero emissions, right? Or, right? Like, Yes. Okay. So are we talking fossil fuels have to go away, or are we saying emissions have to go away?
Right.
And I do think this was a beginning of a conversation that we have to have as a country and as a planet, that we rely 80% on fossil fuels today. Nobody really has this roadmap, right, of how we're going to get there without fossil fuels. We need fossil fuels to get to net zero emissions. They are on a trajectory to do that. And I hear all the time, well, carbon sequestration is expensive. Fine. If we ruled out a source because it was expensive, we wouldn't have solar today. Right. There was an era where solar was expensive. And so you don't take things off the list because they're expensive.
Do you think that whether it's the venue or just the reality of the task at hand in building a net zero energy system, it is true that, you know, it does seem like the conversation has gotten, I want to say, more pragmatic, that, you know, the kind of the need to have every tool in the toolbox be available seemed to be articulated at COP28. Nuclear, carbon management, hydrogen, renewables, reducing methane to make fossil fuel use as clean as possible. You know, do you think that did you sense the conversation shifting in that more, I want to say pragmatic, or like just, emissions focused way?
Absolutely. And to a person, those that have been there before, the comment has been, there were more pragmatic discussions than I have ever had at COP. And I think that's incredibly important, because if we're making decisions on feelings, on political philosophies, that's a huge mistake. We have to make decisions on facts. And so I think it was very healthy to have people and Republicans who went feel like, you know, compared to other discussions, we felt like there was more practicality in the discussions, more accepting, right, of certain facts.
Sure.
And so I would agree with that assessment, and I felt it myself, and those I've talked to felt that way as well.
So one of the tough facts, and we talked a lot about this in here at CSIS before the conference started, is that the world is actually pretty far behind meeting its climate goals. How do you think the conversation evolves from here? Let's start globally, and then I'd love to talk about the U.S. as well. With this higher level of pragmatism, with kind of more solutions on the table. Honestly, I mean, there's like 100,000 people in Dubai, more people coming to the table. What do you hope to see in the next couple years?
So I think one of the things that happened at this COP was, and I don't know, but I'm going to credit UAE for making this happen, is business showed up in a way that they've not been at previous COPs. And business was relevant in a way that they haven't been. And I think if we overlook the innovation that's going to come from business, it's a huge mistake. If you look at it, business has led out way ahead of government regulation on this in many, many cases, right? And I think if we're going to get to a net zero 2050, we have to have the innovation that China, that India is willing to embrace, that is lower emissions. I don't know any way to get China off coal except for us to innovate a low-cost alternative for them. And so I think we need to be having conversations like, because you're right, if we're going to be pragmatic, well, the stat that I've heard, and I believe is accurate, is if every industrialized nation in the world got to zero by the year 2050, we would have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 12%, right? So, and like, we're not dealing with India, we're not dealing with China and their emissions very well. Right. So let's be pragmatic about how we do that. One of the options is innovating a low-cost alternative that the market will move that. Now, I don't think we put all our eggs in that basket. I think we need to talk seriously about trade and things like that. So I think there are other pieces to this. But I also think that this business element that was there is incredibly important. We will not get there, in my opinion, simply by government mandates alone. Right. Right. We need this very innovative marketplace going to work, innovating, and finding solutions that quite frankly aren't yet obvious to us.
Right, and I mean that's really the framework of Paris, right? The mandate version, the Kyoto Protocol, is not tenable globally, and so this kind of what we see evolving. We've written on this here at CSIS. Is you have the big consensus agreements, right? You have the formal negotiations, but one of the most interesting things at each of these COPs, Glasgow was a great example. I think this COP28 in the UAE is a second one. You see these coalitions of the willing.
Yes.
Groups of countries, oftentimes embarking on public-private partnerships, coalitions of businesses, civil society, and the nonprofit world, kind of picking different slices of the problem and saying, we think we can attack this one, and we're going to set this goal for ourselves. Did any of those have stood out to you? Did any of those stand out to you this year? Did you get a chance to talk to anybody who was really kind of at the forefront?
So I'm smiling a little bit because we landed late Friday night. We ran Saturday morning to Sunday night, and we hopped on a plane and came home. Oh. I really regret, right, that I didn't have that window. I had so many people reach out to me and said, "Can I meet with you while you're over there?" We were trapped in between votes here in the House that we're working with, and I think if I do it again, I'm like next year I'm already looking at schedule, and we're also squeezing it into this 2-day window because of our voting schedule here. I think one of the most valuable things I missed was just time on the ground to talk to people. Right. And I'm sorry I didn't have more of that.
But you did get a chance to talk to your colleagues, right? Funny thing about being in Congress is these trips do give you a chance to talk to other folks, maybe folks from across the aisle, about how they're thinking about this issue and what are the paths forward. I know that kind of inspiring a conversation amongst your colleagues in the Republican Party has been a priority of yours. Kind of how did you think that the congressional delegation felt? What were the conversations like between you and your colleagues?
First of all, I will just point out, I want to double down on what you said. I think some of the most valuable time members of Congress spend is on a bus together, in an airplane together. We had, half a day in an airplane together, right? And I would say the theme is permitting reform in our conversations. Okay. And that's very relevant for us as legislators. When you look at, okay, what can we do specifically as legislators? There is nothing that jumps out more right now than permitting reform. And I was on a panel with permitting reform, and Scott Peters made a comment during the middle of the panel of I think I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of like, I think we made more progress in the last few minutes than we've made in a long time, something like that. And so I would say, our conversations, a lot of them were around what can we do within our scope of work, and permitting reform just kind of like screams out at us as, look, there's nothing more detrimental right now to progress than permitting reform. And I think everybody, all the business leaders that were there, all, the government in the United States at least, but I think it's shared in many countries, is we got to figure out permitting reform.
And that's, in your mind, is that a full spectrum conversation? Is that CO2 pipelines, hydrogen pipelines, transmission, just the mines and processing facility for critical minerals? What are the key elements in that? What's going to help us break through?
So this is why it's so hard, because if you click off those things and a few others, where are we going to get our critical minerals? Well, I think it's a stereotype. Republicans want to do more of it here in the United States. You can't because of permitting. How are we going to transport this energy? I think as a stereotype, Democrats care more about that than Republicans. Right. How are we literally going to move this around the grid? And so there's so many layers to permitting reform that it's, in my opinion, it's getting bogged down because every one of these has a constituency, and that's what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're quite to the place yet where everybody's willing to say, got it, I want what I want so bad, I'm willing to give you what you want over here, like with pipelines, right? Or transmission to get this across the finish line. So one approach would be, okay, we're going to take segments of this, but there's really not you lose your motivation for that, because then one group is getting what they want and everybody is not. So then we take it all together, and it's almost overwhelming, right? What needs to be done. But I can tell you that there are a lot of thoughtful conversations among Republicans and Democrats trying to figure out how to move this ball forward.
I want to touch on the theme of how the U.S. finds leadership in the world, right? We over the last 5 years on climate, we've seen, I think, a lot of progress. Countries around the world are committed to action. They share the same goals. How to get there is the big challenge. And, there's no way around the U.S. having some leadership role. I totally think, and it's underappreciated, that the U.S. can't do this alone. We're a smaller and ever decreasing part of the emissions accounting, but we're the largest economy in the world. We're the leading economy in the free world. And so I'm really interested in your thoughts on, how does the U.S. find a way to demonstrate leadership? And, permitting reform might be one of them, but I'm interested in what else you think we can bring to the table.
I would clearly agree with that, but I would also tell you a little bit of a pet peeve of mine.
Sure.
Is that we do a terrible job of talking about our successes. We have made remarkable progress here in the United States. We lead the world in emissions reductions. We don't talk about that. We go to COP and say how bad we are.
Right.
Right. Well, you're not going to take leadership if you're leading with, boy, we're bad. Right. And I wish we could change the paradigm. Yes, we have a lot of work to do. And I think that's why people tend to just not focus on what we've done. But I wish we could change the paradigm and say, look, world, we are leading in emissions reductions. We are leading in innovation. I don't want to go too deep on the IRA, and a lot of my Democratic colleagues will find unusual that I'm actually highlighting it here. But look what the IRA. World, if you don't think we're leading, right, you're not watching. And we're doing a terrible job of broadcasting that. And I think if you're going to be a leader, you got to go in there with strength. You got to say, look what we've done, follow us, right? Mm-hmm. And we're just, I think, too slow to say, hey, we're doing a really good job. And we're too quick to apologize for what we haven't done. And I actually believe we could grab the reins of world leadership simply by doing a better job of saying, follow us. Interesting.
Let me close here, Mr. Curtis. We're about to enter an election year. We don't need to dwell on that. That's not our role here at CSIS whatsoever. But I am interested in the work that you've done with the Conservative Climate Caucus. You and I talked about it in a similar format a year ago.
Right.
How are things going? What do you see as the next big steps that your colleagues want to see, that you think, for the next Congress or the Congress thereafter, we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I love the question. Let me just kind of go back in time a little bit. We created this caucus a couple of years ago. Everybody, predicted my demise because I'm a Republican talking about climate. I insisted on putting climate in the name of the caucus against everybody's advice because Republicans don't want to talk climate, right? That's, but we didn't. We knew that we had to have climate in there or we wouldn't be taken seriously. We were told we would get 5 or 6 members. Today, there are 85 members, House Republicans, that are part of a caucus that has climate in the name. 3 years ago, when I was in Energy and Commerce, when the topic of climate came up, it quickly moved to a debate about the science. Today, when climate comes up, it quickly moves to a debate about methods.
Yep.
Here again, going kind of back to my last point, we do need to stop for a minute and talk about the success that we have had, and moving Republicans into a point where we're leading a delegation to COP, I don't think should be underestimated. Now, that said, just like with climate, we have a lot of work to do, right? And I'm the first to acknowledge that. So the caucus was founded on the principle of educating other Republicans, and kind of my litmus test is, are they comfortable talking in a town hall meeting about climate?
Yeah.
I think if I had my wish when asked about climate, they'd say, oh, of course it's changing. Let me tell you what I'm doing about it. Right. And that's where I want Republicans at. But to kind of turning the corner, I want the caucus to be actually more engaged in promoting specific Republican legislation and specific ideas. And we've started to turn that corner and gotten a little bit more involved in that. I want it to be a place where Republicans bring their legislation to the other members to explain it, to get support for their legislation. And we've just called roughly a half dozen vice chairs to strengthen the organization. It's a little overwhelming for me to do alone. And I'm really pleased for some of the help that I've had from some of them and that we're increasing that. And I sat in Dr. Meek's office, Representative Meek's office yesterday, and talked about the number of areas for us to expand. it was fun and it was exciting and it was overwhelming, right? The number of things that we want this caucus to do. There's so much out there that is important for us to do.
Yeah.
We stood up a Conservative Climate Foundation that will help us travel to COP, travel around the country, bring in speakers, educate members. So I'm very excited for the caucus's future. And I'm not going to be happy till we have every single Republican. And quite frankly, I can't wait till we have some Democrats approach me and say, hey, I want to join the Conservative Climate Caucus.
I was going to say, I mean, how has this, entity been received across the aisle? And, do you sense, you mentioned discussions with colleagues on this trip with Mr. Peters, but do you sense that there's a building momentum behind sort of finding those bipartisan consensus solutions, the ones that we think are going to last through this whole transition?
Absolutely. And I've had just a wonderful reception from my Democratic colleagues, and they're so pleased that we're talking about it, that we're joining them in these conversations. I'll tease them a little bit and say they would like us, now that we're at the table, they want us to accept all of their ideas. And you shouldn't be surprised, right, that we're bringing our own ideas to this. And so we're going to have some debate about ideas. But my colleagues have been very gracious to me. My Democratic colleagues have been very gracious and very supportive of what we're doing. There's actually a caucus called Climate Solutions Caucus that is a bipartisan caucus. And I've always viewed kind of my role as the feeder organization for Republicans in that. And that part of the problem was, as Republicans in the past were going to this bipartisan group, they weren't bringing ideas. And so their only option was, okay, I'm going to plug my nose and find something I can vote for right over on the other side. Well, no, now as we're feeding this organization with thoughtful Republicans, this is the place to have debate on ideas and solutions. And I think that'll be one of the signs of our success, is as that bipartisan group grows too, with Republicans engaged in bringing in ideas.
I'm very heartened to hear that, sir, because one of the things that sticks in my mind is we were saddled with a rather false debate for so long. We never got to have a really vigorous debate about what do we do in a world that's responding to climate risks? What are the right policies to enact? What's the role that the United States wants to play in helping to drive global decarbonization? Is it, the fundamental debate, do we cooperate with China? Do we compete with China for clean energy technologies and market access? There's a rich basket of potential solutions for us to explore. And only, I think, through debate can our democratic process give us a basket of solutions that's going to work for the United States.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And kind of my aha moment was a lot of those solutions are right in Republicans' wheelhouse, right? Like we love a lot of them, right? And we shouldn't shy away from this debate because there's a lot of ideas that we actually really like.
Great. Well, our time is at a close, but I would offer you any last chance, any final comment, things that surprised you on the trip, or what you're looking forward to in the year ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate the people that will take the time to listen to this. One of my things that just is really important to me is that people realize that Republicans do care. We care deeply. And that it's time for us to step up and show that we care and show that we have ideas that are very aligned with conservative values that are, as to use your words, very rich for the discussion. And I think will really move us forward in a much more productive way.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all that you do, Mr. Curtis, and for your public service. We look forward to seeing you again at CSIS soon.
Hope so soon.
And for everyone who's joined us throughout the series, thank you very much. From Dubai to Washington, D.C., the challenges that the world faces in carving out truly sustainable solutions to our climate and energy problems are worthy of debate. They're worthy of objective analysis. We try to do that here at CSIS to the best extent possible, and we're so glad that you all join us in that process. This is our final live program for the year, so we are signing off with wishing you a happy new year and a happy holiday season, and all the best. This is Joseph Mikett signing off. Thank you.